Hi, I'm Shelley. Thanks for inviting me to come. It's really exciting to be here. It's such a great place. Are the people on the other side all set too? Okay, good.
Can you see the slides, Antonella?
Her name is?
Antonella.
Oh, Antonella.
Yeah, she's on
Okay.
I cannot.
It's not you, it's
You
not
gotta
you.
read
Okay.
to it.
Okay.
See, there's no way for us to tell.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
she's not seeing it.
See?
Yeah.
So there's zero
It's
feedback.
good to check with all your participants, eh?
With no access to that code.
So, you know, it's really funny. I have a hard time sitting down because then I can't see the people who are sitting on the floor. So if it doesn't bother you, I'd rather
As long as you
sort of
keep
stand.
moving from side to side so we can see your whole slide.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah,
So-
you're not moving.
I wanted to give a little bit of background as to sort of why this is what I'm doing. I started teaching at Carnegie Mellon. I was a consultant for 25 years before I started teaching at Carnegie Mellon 4 years ago. And in my first year, I invited a couple of people to come and speak. And one of them was Hugh Dubberly. And Hugh Dubberly, for those of you who don't know him, he worked at Apple and at Netscape and has his own consulting firm now. But one of the interesting things is that he talked about how developing models in his practice, in his work, in his experience at Netscape and Apple and every place else was a really nice way of moving towards getting common ground among team members and participants. Then Rick Robinson also came and spoke for me, and he is a social scientist, and he also talked about the role that models or these kinds of shared representations played in their work. And so one of the things that I experienced in 25 years of practice is some challenges around getting people to really agree about what we think we mean together as a team. So I decided that I was going to start looking at this and specifically in relation to interaction design, service design projects. So I think most of you sort of know my view in that you have to do really important immersive people research, like some of the really wonderful stuff we saw already. And then you come to models, and then that helps you figure out what or how to design. So most of what I'm going to talk about today really focuses on that piece, the models piece. Let's see. Oh, I see what happened. Oh, no. Okay. Well, what I'm out of sync with my presenter view and the other view. Sorry about that. I'm sorry?
I always wondered how it worked. That's
Well, I'm just going to go for it this way, I think. Maybe. It's not moving forward, that's the problem. There we go. Okay. So when I'm doing this with my students, usually we're looking at data that's generated fairly quickly. I'm sure that's never the problem for you guys. You have lots of time and lots of money to spend doing a lot of research. There's always this challenge to deal with a lot of different contexts. And it's always the challenge to integrate the perspectives from a lot of different kinds of people. So you don't always, at least in my world, the ideal for me is that you have all of the different kinds of people actually participating in the immersive research. It's not just the design folks, it's not just the anthropologists, the technical people are there as well. So that's really what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about people research. Then the parts to this talk are really this little bit of background, talking about what are those things that you're looking at and that you want to represent in your models, the ways of representing the information, and then also the roles of models in in the design work. Boy, I don't know what happened here. Sorry. Okay. So this is, I'm going to talk you through a little model here from my friend Hugh. And here's me, and here's you, and here's the project. Okay? So the next thing that sort of happens here is that you have my model of what the project is, and your model of what the project is, right? So here we are. The next thing that happens is I have my model of your model of the project, right? And then really what we're looking at here is my model of what of the correspondence between your model of the subject and my model of the subject. And I think most of you have probably experienced where you spend a lot of time working with people. You can spend a whole day working together, collaborating. You think that you are all on the same page, that there is this perfect correspondence between what I think and what you think, and we go off and do our work, and we come back a week later and we find that, well, actually what you thought I thought wasn't exactly what we thought it was. And so the problem is if you don't work really hard to establish a shared representation together, then I think you have this kind of issue of this lack of correspondence between my view of the project and your view of the project. It's doing it again. This is the strangest thing. Okay. So Don Norman has this really nice description of this in Things That Make Us Smart. The power of the unaided mind is highly overrated. Without these external things, it's really hard for us to leverage our thinking beyond the words. So it's really important for us to work on producing things outside of us. So when I talk about models, you know, if this goes out to the rest of Google and engineers hear this, they're going to go, models? That's not what a model is. I'm really talking about diagrams here or frameworks that represent some aspect of the experience. And I'm really specifically here talking about producing these things as a way of facilitating communication in a design team. They help integrate the findings from your people research, and they really do help make you smart. So models are also a bridge. So again, this is a really nice model from Hugh Dubberly, which was kind of based off of some stuff from Rick Robinson, Stafford Beer, Christopher Alexander, but I've also modified it too. But what we have is this really nice little 2x2 where you look at, this is the concrete, this is actually looking at stuff in the world, okay? And then you move up from that and you produce a model of what you've seen in the world. So you document your findings and you produce some sort of representation of what it is that you've seen. And then you can work on top of that model to produce a new representation, which is a model of what you think it might be. And then when you move back down again, so what you're starting to do here is shift over into prototyping. And what you move down here and you get concrete again is that you produce a prototype of what you think it might be. So what you're doing is you're sort of going around and around here. And as you get more information, more feedback from your prototype, you can go back out into the world and get validation on that. So again, nice description in Don Norman and Things That Make Us Smart. The things that you really want to do for your models is capture the important features of the represented world. So that first square, really make sure that you understand exactly what's going on there. So what I mean is if you are When we're looking at services, for example, at Carnegie Mellon, you're looking at a journey of a patient, for example, when they come into cancer treatment for a day. So what are you going to do? What is their day like when they come in? So you're going to work really hard to capture that. What they try and do is you want to develop models in a way that really helps your design team. All of those different disciplines come to the same place. Get to regularities and structures so that you can make decisions for your design challenge, and then again, help you go back out and get more and more focused data. So the first part that I'm going to go through here is really the what's that you're depicting. So what I'm saying is, how do you determine sort of when you go out in the world to do your immersive research, thinking about the kinds of things that you want to be looking at. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, so I want to make sure that that's really, really clear. But these are just some examples of the kinds of things: processes, attitudes, approaches, relationships, and user types. And some of these will be more familiar. So what do we mean by a process? Like I said, an example here is going in, a cancer patient for the day is going in for a treatment. What's that process like? What are the kinds of things that are going on there? Why do you want to model processes? Well, I think, it's pretty clear that when you document exactly what's going on, from the service line in your cafeteria to any other sort of process, it really becomes clear where the breakdowns are. You can see almost always there are Post-its where breakdowns happen, or notes or other kinds of signage. So you see what's going on there. You see what's part of the process and what's not, and that's a really important piece, actually sort of defining what is a part of the process and what's not, so, especially in design challenges, because oftentimes when you go in and you're looking at a new thing, you tend to get so wide that everything is everything, and it becomes really hard to move forward. You can have discussions around where interventions can be made. Could we put a new set of ropes there in the line at the cafeteria? If we put that intervention in, then what happens? And you can also, what's really nice about it is you can compare the process of going through the line at the cafeteria to the process of a cancer patient going through treatment for a day. How are those things alike? How are they different? What can you learn from each one of those things that might actually change your perspective on what's going on? So actually producing a representation is this representation is really important. So this is an example of this was an online service that was supposed to link consumers with service providers. And so you see that consumers were getting people like plumbers and cleaning people or repair people to come into their house. And it started off with what you would find this service online, you would register, you'd figure out which service you want, you'd look at the different service providers, you'd select one, and you'd send a request. And on the service provider side, so the people who were delivering the service had this going on where they were there, they would put in their schedule, and then a pending request was there. It would match up between, could the person who was requesting the service, could the actual service provider that they had selected be there at that time and be available, and then the acceptance happened and all of this other stuff happened. Well, the interesting thing about producing this representation when we were working on this project was that they had no visualization of this. So they thought they could batch process this, so they could do this overnight. Well, of course, there's no service. If you have to wait overnight, then you get a notification, but actually, no, we can't make it. And so it's really important to visualize it. Modeling attitudes. These are complex mental states. And I think oftentimes we don't think about attitudes enough. What we want to do is map experiences to the attitude a person has as a particular moment so that it feels like it's been designed for them personally. I think, again, a lot of what we saw earlier today is that we make assumptions about what the attitudes are coming from our perspective and not understanding and consciously reflecting on those attitudes is a danger. So you have to understand what the attitudes people have coming to a particular experience are. You know, are they using this because they have to? You know, is it you know, I'm renewing my driver's license online, you know, and so I have an attitude about what that should be like. I have an expectation about what that's like based on the fact that I used to stand in line with all of these people. What are the kinds of things that I can account for in that situation and either help move people past that expectation or decide that that's not something that we have to deal with anymore. And then this is an example of an attitudes map. So what in this situation, we were looking at trying to change the identity and the internal, the intranet for this organization, and we understood what the different qualities that the organization was reflecting. So what did the organization think that they were good at or think were their values, and what were actually reported as what the values were. So the ones that were inside are things that everybody felt were actually values demonstrated, and then also on the outside were all the ones that were challenged. So we had to, in designing the new identity and the new intranet, account for those different values and make sure that we were either going to deal with them or choose not to deal with them. Approaches, how people approach a task, how they go about a difficult problem. I think that the difference in my mind between a process, which I talked about earlier, and an approach is that if you ask people about approaches, they can usually verbalize that. So a process is something you often go through and you don't even think about it. You're just kind of going through it. But an approach is the way that we do this. I have never had this problem before. Okay. So it reveals how they're looking at it. It's really important that if you're designing something in a new way that's going to deviate with the way that people currently think about it, currently think about their approach, you have to account for that in the design. So you want to think about that. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is oftentimes if you get people to verbalize about their approach, you'll find that different people have unique strategies for dealing with something, and that if you pulled that out, then you could apply that to everyone. So it's often you'll get these kind of quirks or these workarounds that people do, and they're actually really much more powerful than the original way that it was conceived of. So here's an example of crossing organizational silos. So you're going to do initiatives, you're going to do research, you're going to identify experiences, and then in the end you're going to draft plans to align the initiatives and crisscross across the silos. So someone in an organization can verbalize, this is the way that we're going to deal with the fact that we don't find a way to talk to each other across silos. Relationships is another thing that you want to be looking at, connections between representative examples or components that's typical. I think that what's important about looking at relationships is it gives you a handle on the granularity or the dependencies that you might have between things. And it gives you insight into how the audience perceives the elements. And once you cluster them, you often get a sense of where opportunities exist. Now, the best examples I have of these are actually from the New York Times. These are the maps that were produced after the different conventions at the last presidential election, and looking at the words that the speakers used in both conventions. Gives you a really interesting sense about what the conversation was, what was important in each of those events. So it's a nice way of thinking about if you're looking at, you're observing people using a particular application, and you do think aloud protocols with them, you get them to verbalize what's going on, and you could do some sort of word frequency on that, and then see what those different, maybe there's a clustering of different kinds of people, different categories of things. I also like that they looked at it this way according to each one of the different speakers, and then the number of times the words were spoken. The interesting thing too, I think, is whenever I teach people outside of Carnegie Mellon and work in workshops and things, this is the method that people find they can do right away because it's a word count and it's frequency. Some of the other methods are more challenging, but it's a nice one to start with. And then this one I'm sure you're all familiar with. I really think that this is just another model. Archetypal users or personas. And this is a quote from Alan Cooper and Ryman in About Phase 2. After we formalize the patterns, we can systematically construct patterns of interactions that match the behaviors, models, and goals. And the other thing that I think is really important is that it helps you unfold the experience, whether people are at a specific life stage. I'm a young person, or I'm an old person with the cardigan. The different experience levels, so that you can, in your work, account for people and design your applications so that they are absolutely fabulous for first-time use, but at the same time they can be designed so that they can account for experts. So thinking about that, the different motivations, and you need archetypal users for scenarios in your process. And this is just an example of a persona done by some of my students. Okay, so now the ways of representing. So here's the kind of the challenge here, is that it would be really nice if I could say, well, in this kind of situation, use this way of representing it, because that's always the way for this kind of information. But it's really, really hard to say this way of representing the information is always going to give you the best results. You really need to play around with it. And the people at IBM Research who've done many eyes, the way that they describe it here is that it's finding the right way to view your data is as much art as science. So I think what's nice about what's going on with Many Eyes and also with Swivel is that it's introducing a new form of visual literacy for folks, new ways of looking at data. And here they have different categories of ways of representing or visualizing the data, and they give some suggestions about what they're good for. So that's good. Ben Fry, who's our current Nuremberg chair at Carnegie Mellon, who's really fabulous, in his dissertation on computational information design, listed all of these different ways. So I'm not going to, my list is far shorter. I'm just going to walk through some of these. There are more and more variations, and they aren't always pure, as you'll see. But here's a representation of a spider, and it's organized by placing the central theme or unifying idea in the center. In this case, the outwardly radiating sub-ideas or petals surround this sort of common functionality. So this was a an online experience for selling art and fine craft. There were 5 different roles that were to be supported, or 5 different kinds of users. And the underlying functionality was the same, so each one of these darker gold ones had the same underlying functionality, but the way that it was represented to the user felt different because it was different for each role. But the ones in the center were common services. And the thing that was interesting about this is, I said, it was a site that was selling art and fine craft. And this model was produced and constructed collaboratively in all the team members, and actually the CEO of the organization as well. And what was interesting about this is that that person felt that, the CEO felt that this was actually about, the model reflected what they did in a sort of artistic way, so that she felt really good about the model, so that it had something to do with its role. But she also picked it up and carried it, so that whenever there was scope creep, she would always refer back to the model and say, so where does that fit in the model? Are we adding new things, and is this really? So it became a way of having this kind of common framework or common language that everybody, she was not a technical person at all. She was a business person, and it was a way for her to be able to understand and also say what's important. Here's another spider, and I throw this in because I think it's great because it's a spider of spiders. This is done by Nigel Holmes. The idea in the center isn't identified. It's really about attention. This is another spider diagram that was constructed for work that we did at Carnegie Mellon on the U.S. Postal Service for their DMM. Another way of representing is a process flow linear. I showed that earlier. It helps us look at things over time, behavior over time. This is one from my friend Hugh looking at the flow of information across a mobile device. They actually produce these very long and complicated maps of what's going on. This is a representation from, again, some student work where we were looking at any place, anywhere, anytime level of interactivity. And this particular team decided that they wanted to focus on connecting family members in a really low sort of cost, not financial cost, but low cost, lightweight sort of way. So they looked at over time among people, and then sort of how the mapping of the individual versus shared activities were. You can do them in a circular way as well. So here's a process flow circular. I'll go through these kind of quickly. I think I'm running out of time. This is the bad part. Here, you can just get the idea. Venn, actually popularized by John Venn. My favorite one, useful, usable, delightful. This is a nice variation on that that Hugh did for the Gain Journal on what do people desire, what will sustain a business, and what can we build. Subsequently, we have changed this, or I've persuaded him that he should change it so that actually all arrows point to the center. So instead of it happening in a cycle where you start with people, or you start with business, or you start with technology, we're actually doing all 3 simultaneously together. 2x2s, everybody knows those. Just one on looking at different research methods, defining a sweet spot for a product. Again, that sort of family-centered thing. System or network. This is actually, I think, a really useful mnemonic when thinking about especially cell kinds of communications. Again, I think some of the stuff we saw earlier was looking at the relationship between me and the other person, but oftentimes what you were showing was me and us, and then this complete collaboration with all the way out to them. And when you're thinking about designing for, I think, those kinds of mobile applications, it's an important framework to keep in mind. And maps. This is one of my favorite maps. Another really nice map from the New York Times, again, based on the election. This was, does anybody here remember news maps? No? This was really great. It was a Web 1.0 kind of application that took a reading of the news and produced these landscapes. So the relationships between the articles are represented, and each one of these dots is a particular news story, and they were all placed. It was really wonderful. And then, of course, Martin Wattenberg's map of the markets. So now I'm going to really quickly, I have how much time?
Go back another 4 or 5 minutes, then we'll discuss and we'll switch to.
Okay, all right. So anyway, what the models do in the process, I think, is really represented here, where we're thinking about what we have to our project, and we create a territory map. That's our very first kind of model. We do our research. We produce a model of what is. We produce a model of what might be. We prototype and then come back. Here's an example. Gosh, these are like so washed out. Mapping of the territory of work. This was an online language application, and actually deciding where self-paced language learning was, where it fell within all of these different things. So what happens when you do a territory map? Again, it's this very first thing you do as a team, and we usually do it in the first week and a half, and say, what is it that we're working on? And by nature of what's not there, these are all the things we're not working on. So, and it becomes this mnemonic for the group going forward. Here's, again, the group that was looking at family and connections. So they said that they wanted to address values, they wanted to look at activities, and they wanted to reinforce loving relationships. So then all of the things that are inside here are all the things that they need to be researching. And of course, it's not exhaustive because you've only spent, the first week and a half on it, but it gives a framing for moving forward that you can all share. This is an example of documenting research findings. What this team was looking at was the patient and therapist relationship, and then how back-end systems actually influenced how that face-to-face conversation actually would go. Because they were really trying to understand, if we redesign the back-end system, how's it going to impact that time that a patient has with a therapist? This one, I think, is a really important one because this particular team looked at what students were doing in creating, when they created a Lego artifact. And so the actual process where what can you make, actually doing it, producing the artifact, and then splitting it up is here. And then as you move further out in this, you can actually see product concepts. So this is actually the design implications of the product concepts that you can overlay. So it's moving up to that what could be. They understood what was, and then moved out into what could be. And then also in explaining final solutions. The online learning environment was actually creating a collaborative book of knowledge. And so this was showing how individual schools would send content up into the system. It would be voted on by the masses, and then it would either get taken up into the service, the online French service, or not. So this will be really interesting to see if this works. That's what I was afraid of. All right, so here's another example of looking at what to do with all the images. So this team, what we did is we used a method that I call directed storytelling, where we generated the data in an hour and a half. And it was using the people in the room and understanding what they did with their images on their cell phones. And this is a cluster of all of those things. Then they came up with the groupings from the cluster analysis, started doing sketches, and then ultimately produced this, this representation of what was going on with people in their images. That there is this, there are these 4 overall stages. Within that, there are these sub-stages. One is really highly charged with emotion. Individual experiences are different. They discovered this this is the capturing moment. And then here's image purgatory. And a lot of those images that don't go anywhere. But some of them actually sort of move on to other places. So some of them go into email and whatever. But you get the sense of what's going on here. Yep.
We want to leave a little time for questions.
Okay,
discussion.
just one more slide.
Okay, one more. Great.
There we go. Okay.
What a nice-
So, if you think about this, we're never going to produce the right model, but the important thing is that we do have some shared representation that we can all get into. So, that's it.
We left all this time for you.
This is really hard. Like, as you've been doing this, it's really great talk, and thank you. And I've been trying to, like, sort out ideas that I've been struggling with in my brain for the last couple of weeks and, like, been completely, I feel like, dumb about being unable to communicate it. But it was great that you had all these examples, but it's still, like, so much hard work and trying to figure out how to organize a set of concepts. Especially, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it is, and it's not easy. But I think the important thing is that, what I like to say is that the paper is in the middle of the table and that we're actually all drawing on the paper. And if you can get the people, if you can put something out there that everybody can start to work on top of, then I think that you sort of have half the battle. Or they can say, gosh, that's not the way I saw it at all. And then you start to really get a sense of how are you seeing it versus how I'm seeing it. But if you don't put it out there, if you don't sort of go beyond the words and put it out there, then you don't have that opportunity to get that shared view. And I can tell you that it makes a huge difference in how productive teams can be.
I have a specific question about slide 12. Is it possible to go to slide 12? I don't mean to pick on this slide. What I'm curious about is how that stands and functions as an object in the design and communication process. So while you're hunting for it, design 12 was the flower,
Yeah.
right?
It's the flower.
And it was the flower one. And it, looking at that as a computer scientist, I say, oh, it's a tree diagram. Thank you. It's a hierarchy, right? Now clearly you've got different receivers of those designs. And in particular, as I recall, you said something like that was a fine arts supplier or something like that. And so they particularly resonated with that. One of the classically hard problems about doing design is you have different constituencies. And you have to make them all happy, or to some degree of happy simultaneously. So how do you make that choice when you're choosing a model or a representation diagram space like this? Do you just feel good about it, or do you have a more methodical way of thinking about this?
Well, actually, I don't know why it's like not allowing me to control the slide. It's very funny, but we went through a lot of different ways of representing that. So I think that's really the important thing. We showed the team the same content. All of those, these are the different roles, here are the different applications that we're providing underneath. Here's how we're, economizing with the applications so that they feel different for different people, and here's all our core functionality. But we showed that in a whole a variety of different ways. And what we settled on was the one that had the most resonance for the most people of the team. But I will also tell you that, like the one with the therapist and looking at the back-end systems, you show that to people and they go, ooh, you know, like that's way too complicated. So I think that when you're designing your models, what you're also looking at is who is ultimately going to be seeing this. In the case of the Art and Fine Craft Place, we really wanted buy-in from the organization. So they had to own the representation. They had to feel that this was their site that was being built. This was their business that was being built. So it was crucial for them to participate and feel good about it. But there's some models you would never show, in my world, the consulting world, the client, because they would be frightened that this is it, you know, you have 3 bubbles there. That's all we're getting for this amount of money? How can that be? So.
Yeah, you didn't see the other 50,000 that we discarded.
Right. Right.
So tell you what, let's do the switch over.
Okay.
If we could.